Dan, you gotta help. My PC case is sick. Get it on the bench now. What's the problem? There's no hardware inside. We've got to build in this ASAP. But first, let's talk about the case. So this is the Lian Li O11D Mini V2, and it's actually an upgraded version from the original O11D Mini. And I unfortunately don't have the original one here with me, so we can't really do an A and B comparison, but it's available in black and in white, and there are two versions available for each. There's one that comes with no fans, which is the one I have here, and it comes in at $90 USD. Then there's also one that comes with 5 pre-installed fans, and that comes in at $100 USD. And it comes with 3 reverse blade fans on the bottom and 2 reverse blade fans on the side. So this is a dual glass design. We've got glass on the side and glass on the front. We've got mesh on the top. Take a look at the back panel. We've got mesh over here where side fans or a radiator is going to sit. And then we also have this mesh section right here, which is really interesting because if we take a closer look, we can actually see that it protrudes from the case slightly. And that's actually so we can fit ATX PSUs in this small chassis, which is really cool. So here's a look at the rear. We've got ventilation for our rear fan. Here's where our motherboard sits, where our PSU sits. There's the back of the drive caddies. There's our PCIe slot covers. And then our I/O for the case is actually down here. And the cool thing about this is you can actually relocate the I/O to the top. You can see we have this blank spot filled in right here, and you can actually remove this little cover and then relocate the I/O from the bottom to the top, which I actually think I'm gonna do for this build. So I'll go ahead and show that off a bit later. But clean design, definitely that signature O11 look. And then if we take a look back here, we do have a dust filter for the bottom intake fans. And then we also do have, like, it's not removable, but we do have a filter right here for the side fans. So let's go ahead and take off these panels and then talk about the inside. So all of the panels on this case are toolless removal, and there are a couple captive screws, but you do not need any tools in order to remove all these panels. And one thing I really like is the front glass panel is toolless removal, because there's normally a couple screws always holding in the front glass, but this one you can just pop off and remove super easily, and you have full access to your build, so it should make it super easy to build in. So the first thing I want to point out is the bottom of the case is actually angled, and Lian Li says this is better for GPU cooling. And then you actually also do get a better view of your bottom fans since it's angled a little bit. And this bracket has to come out in order to mount your bottom fans. And there's one screw right here and then one screw right here. And once you remove those two, you can take out the bracket. And this bracket will support 3 120 millimeter fans. You can fit a 120 millimeter fan on the rear. 2 120 millimeter fans on the side, or up to a 240 millimeter radiator. Then you also have these little pieces right here. You have one at the top and then you have one at the bottom, and those can be positioned in different spots. So let's say I'm running a radiator, I can have it set in the middle, I can have it set higher, I can have it set lower. So you actually have the option to position it wherever you'd like. So that's kind of cool. Then you can fit up to 3 120 millimeter fans on the top, or up to a 360 millimeter radiator. So this case will support ATX motherboards and back connect ATX boards. And that's what all of these grommets are right here, or excuse me, these cavities are right here to support back connect boards. And then if you're using a micro ATX board, there's actually 2 positions in which you can install a micro ATX board. There's the upper position, and then if you move the standoffs down one, there's the lower position. So depending on your build, you may be doing a custom loop, and you may have it in the bottom position, so that will give you more clearance on top for a thicker radiator on top. Or if it's in the upper position, you can fit a thicker radiator on bottom. So it really depends on what you're planning and what you're doing, but that's pretty cool. It's got a built-in GPU sag bracket if you're mounting your GPU horizontally. So this piece right here will support it, and this could be adjusted up and down, and then this whole piece can be adjusted side to side. And then if you're mounting your GPU vertically, they give you this piece right here. So this actually bolts into your bottom fans, and you have to be using bottom fans in order to use this, but this bolts to your bottom fans, and this piece right here actually supports the bracket for being vertically mounted. So that's really cool. They thought of this. Then they also included this piece right here. So this is if you are mounting your GPU vertically, you can go to the back and then you can install this in there and mount your GPU vertically. So that's really cool. They thought of that. And then we also have the box that contains all of the screws needed for this. So for your motherboard, for your power supply, and I unfortunately can't get it open. Oh, there's a piece of tape right here, I'm sorry. But this contains some zip ties and all of the screws necessary to build in this case. So let's see, what else do we got in here? Oh yeah, they included this down here. There's a grommet down at the bottom because in other Lian Li cases, let's say you're using a GPU streamer cable, some of them are really thick. And then when you're trying to route it down over the bottom fans, it's really hard to fit it under the motherboard. So they gave you this grommet, which gives you a little bit of play to make sure it fits under the motherboard, especially with ATX boards. So we've got a grommet down here, so I'll have to see how I utilize this. And I'm actually not using streamer cables, but we'll see if I end up using that little piece right there. So I think that's it for the front. Let's go ahead and move on to the back. We've got two drive caddies down here for 2.5 inch and 3.5 inch drives. Then like I said earlier, we can fit ATX PSUs in this case, which is awesome because it is a smaller chassis, and being able to use an ATX PSU is absolutely awesome. And we've got a bunch of cable management tie down points. So you guys know me, I absolutely love cable management and go all in on every build. So I'll have to report back later how it is. Then like I was saying earlier, you can relocate the IO to the top panel, and this is actually the top panel right here. I have it removed. So there's this little dummy piece right here. So you just pop this out, and then what you do is there's two screws on this side that you're going to remove, and then there's two screws on this side in which you remove. And then once you get those out of there, you can take the IO out, and then you can relocate it to this panel, which gets installed on the top. So that's awesome. So you have two positions for the front IO, or I guess top IO, in certain situations. And we've got all of our front panel connectors, the cables down here. So we'll have to see if I end up using these for the build, if I keep the IO on the front or on the top. But I think that about does it for details for the case. If there's anything I'll miss, I'll go ahead and cover it after the build is done. I think it's time to cure this sick PC case. Dan, you may proceed with the build. Looks like my baby is back to being healthy again. Let's show him the finished build, Dan. So the PC is full of hardware and it is fully back to health, and the build looks absolutely awesome. Such a cool little case. I've always been a big fan of the O11 line. As you can see, I've got the O11 Vision compact as my main rig. And this one's actually a bit smaller. And I decided to go for some blue RGB because I normally never do. It's like a light blue, and I think it looks cool. So let's do a little once around of the case. Not too much to see up here. We've got reverse blade fans on the side and the bottom, and that little angle really kind of makes the bottom fans pop even more. So I think even with some like LCD fans down there, that may look really cool. Take a look at the back. Not a ton to see, but the PSU fits absolutely perfect in here. It's pretty much almost sitting against this protruding part on the back right here. But Lian Li did their homework, and that PSU fits absolutely perfect in there, and it's going to get a ton of fresh air in there as well. There's the side, so we can get fresh air into those side intake fans. Here's the rear. Not a ton to see. So let's go ahead and take off these panels and then talk about the build process and the build. So the build consists of a 9800X3D CPU, and we've got a Palette Gaming Pro 5070. And keeping the CPU cool is the Montek Silent Flow 360mm AIO. We've got a Strix B850 motherboard. We've got 32 gigabytes of PNY RAM, their XLR8. We've got a Corsair MP600 Elite SSD in here. We got 4 terabytes. And all of the fans are the Lian Li CL wireless. And these are the more budget-friendly fans from Lian Li. But they still have their wireless technology, where fan speed and RGB are wirelessly controlled. And they are controlled by this RGB controller that's plugged into a USB port. So there's no physical connection between the fans and the controller itself. And I love these fans because they are great for cable management. There's hardly any cables needed to power all these fans. But this build just looks so cool. Loving how this turned out. And then for power, we have a Strix, an Asus Strix 850 watt power supply. And I'm using their stock power supply cables, which are actually really nice and really easy to manage. And they're a bit thinner too, so really easy to get them to do what you want. Then here's the Dankamyouknow cable management, which I am really happy with. This is basically all the cables in the PC. I've got my CPU cables going up there and then over to the motherboard. Basically everything is right here. And then I do have the GPU cable kind of tied off underneath this drive caddy. And then for the front panel connections, you can see the cables come down here and they go down here, so it looks really clean. So what I did was I plugged all of the cables in, and then I pulled all the excess cables through this hole, and they're actually tied underneath the case. You can see some right there, but all the excess cabling is zip tied underneath the case. And I do this all the time, and it just makes it look so much cleaner, so I don't have a ton of slack with those cables. But super clean looking, and I'm really happy with the cable management on this build, and it's definitely up to the Dankamyouknow standards. So this looks awesome. And then as far as the build process itself, it was pretty easy to build in. I didn't really run into any hiccups. I would recommend installing the AIO and fans before the rear fan. I actually had to take the rear fan off in order to get this in, or at least have the rear fan at its lowest position before installing the radiator. The GPU sag bracket worked extremely well. Let's see if I can get it to focus on it. Let me change the focus point. GPU sag bracket works great. I had to adjust it up to be able to support the GPU, but I didn't move it left and right at all, and it's not obstructing with the fan or anything like that. And I really like how you can get to it from this angle. So you can see the screw right there. So that's the screw to adjust it up and down. So you just need a long shank screwdriver, and then you can go ahead and adjust it to wherever you need to. So the sag bracket works great. And then let's see, what else was there with this build? Everything was pretty easy. I didn't really run into any issues at all. One thing I didn't mention earlier was there's actually a bracket for the power supply. So instead of the PSU just bolting directly to the case, there's a bracket that you take off with these two screws. You bolt it to the power supply, and then you install that all as one unit. And I actually didn't notice that earlier, but really easy to do. Not really a concern at all. And then also one more thing that I forgot to mention is if you're running an MATX board, so when it's installed in the upper position, you have this piece right here. But if it's installed in the lower position, you could actually move it to right here. So you don't have like a big hole in the back right here. So I forgot to mention that earlier too. There's a better look at it. But easy build. Thermals are fantastic. I ran a couple benchmarks for the CPU, and the max temperature I saw for the 9800 X3D, I believe, was 74 degrees Celsius. It is a smaller case, but there is a ton of airflow, and the temperatures were great. And then for the GPU, the max temperature I saw, I think, was 67 degrees Celsius, if I'm remembering correctly, but nothing concerning in the slightest bit. And then in gaming, even lower than that. Pretty much low 60s for both. But super clean build, guys. Let me know what you think down in the comments. Is there anything you would change? And just let me know what you think. Like the video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you enjoy my content. Share this with your friends. And I'll see y'all in the next video.